In the autumn of 1884, when the silver veins beneath Colorado's mountains still promised fortunes, and the territories were drunk on the fever of westward expansion, there existed a town called Ashfall. It sat wedged between two peaks in the San Juan Range, a settlement of perhaps 300 souls who had come seeking metal and stayed because leaving required admitting defeat. The town took its name from the constant gray dust that fell from the smelting operations, coating everything in a fine ash that made the place look perpetually in mourning. Even on clear days, when the sun broke through the altitude's thin air, Ashfall wore its shroud. The mountains themselves were ancient, older than any human reckoning, their peaks perpetually white with snow that never fully melted even in the brief summer months. The Ute people had lived in these ranges for generations before the white men came with their picks and their dynamite and their hunger for what lay buried in the stone. They had names for these mountains, names that spoke of spirits and warnings and places where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead grew thin. But the miners did not speak Ute, and would not have listened if they did. The town itself was built in haste and without grace, a collection of wooden structures that seemed to cling to the mountainside like a fungus to a dying tree. The main street, if it could be called such, was little more than a muddy track that became impassable in spring when the snowmelt turned it into a river of freezing muck. Buildings lined this street in no particular order or plan. The saloons, of which there were 3, stood cheek by jowl with the general store, the assayer's office, a boarding house, a butcher shop that sold more horse meat than beef, and a dozen smaller establishments that came and went with the changing fortunes of the mines. Above the town, cut into the mountainside like wounds, were the mine entrances, dozens of them, some productive, most not, all of them hungry. They consumed men the way the smelters consumed ore, grinding them down to nothing, spitting out what was useless, keeping what had value. The largest was called the Redemption, a name chosen by the Boston investors who owned it, men who had never set foot in Colorado and never would, who saw the operation only as numbers in ledgers, never as the suffering of human flesh. The men who worked the Redemption and the smaller claims around it were a hard breed. They descended into darkness every morning before dawn and emerged, if they emerged, after sunset. They breathed rock dust and sweated in tunnels where the temperature could reach 100 degrees, then froze in the high-altitude nights. They died in cave-ins, from bad air, from accidents with explosives, from the simple accumulated damage of breathing stone dust for months or years. Their bodies were buried in a cemetery on the eastern slope, marked with wooden crosses that weathered and fell within a season. No one in Ashfall expected to die, old or peacefully. Death was as much a part of the landscape as the mountains themselves. The people there were the usual composition of frontier settlements. Miners with hands like leather and eyes gone milky from rock dust. Merchants who had followed the money west. Gamblers and prostitutes who worked the saloons where men spent their wages trying to forget the darkness of the mines. A handful of families who had somehow maintained their civility despite the brutality of the landscape. A doctor who drank too much. A preacher who believed too little, and scattered among them, the drifters, the men running from something, the ones whose names changed with each territory they crossed. I came to Ashfall in late September of that year, riding a horse I had bought in Durango with the last of my savings. My name is Samuel Mercer, and I was 28 years old, though I felt decades older. I had been a school teacher in Pennsylvania before the war, and after I could not stand to be in rooms full of children anymore. The things I had seen at Cold Harbor had carved something essential out of me. So I drifted west, like so many other broken men, looking for a place remote enough that the screaming in my nightmares would not disturb respectable people. The war had ended in 1865, nearly 20 years passed, but for me it had never truly concluded. I could still smell the powder smoke, still hear the Minié balls whistling through the air like hornets, still feel the impact as they struck flesh, that wet thud that sounded nothing like what you imagined death would sound like. I had gone to war believing in the cause, believing in the righteousness of the Union, believing that some things were worth dying for. I returned believing in nothing except that young men died screaming for their mothers and that God, if he existed, had turned his face away from that Virginia field. At Cold Harbor, in June of 1864, I had been part of a charge against entrenched Confederate positions. It was slaughter. We knew it would be slaughter before we went. But we went anyway because those were our orders. 7,000 Union soldiers fell in less than an hour, most of them in the first 8 minutes. I should have been among them. I felt bullets pass so close. I could feel the wind of their passage. I saw the man next to me, a boy, really perhaps 19, from Ohio, take a round through the throat. He looked at me with such surprise, as though he had just remembered something important he needed to tell me. And then he fell. I kept walking forward, waiting for my own bullet, almost wanting it, but it never came. After the war, I tried to return to teaching. I found a position at a small school outside Philadelphia, teaching grammar and arithmetic to children whose biggest concerns were whether they would get dessert with dinner. I lasted 3 months. The sound of their laughter felt like mockery. The sight of their unblemished faces felt like an accusation. These children would never know what I knew, would never see what I had seen, and I hated them for their innocence almost as much as I envied it. So, I left. I went west, where the land was still raw and the people were still rough, where a man's past was his own business and no one asked questions they did not want answered. I worked as a clerk in Kansas City for a year, then as a railway porter in Colorado Springs, then as a laborer in various mining camps, always moving, always restless, always trying to outrun the ghosts that followed me. But ghosts are patient, and they do not tire, and no matter how far west I went, they were always there when I closed my eyes. I had heard Ashfall needed a school teacher. The previous one had left suddenly, they said, and the mining company that effectively owned the town wanted to maintain some veneer of civilization. I was not particular about the circumstances. I needed work, and a schoolhouse seemed as good a place as any to wait out whatever remained of my life. At least children, I reasoned, might distract me from my thoughts. At least the ritual of teaching, of imposing order on young minds, might impose some order of my own. The boarding house where I took a room was run by a widow named Mrs. Cordelia Hatch, a severe woman in her 50s who had come west with her husband during the rush and stayed after he died in a shaft collapse. She kept a clean establishment and asked few questions, which suited me. My room was small, with a single window that looked out on the mountains, and a narrow bed, and a washstand, and very little else. There was a mirror on the wall, a cheap thing with a warped surface that made my reflection look slightly melted, but I rarely looked at it anyway. The school was a single-room structure at the eastern edge of town, built from pine boards that had already begun to gray. Inside were 12 rough-hewn desks, a cast-iron stove that barely kept the cold at bay, and a blackboard I had to wash with snow because the town had no budget for proper cleaning supplies. My students ranged from 6 to 14, children of miners mostly, their hands already calloused, their futures already written in the depth of the shafts. I taught them reading and arithmetic and geography, though what use these would be to children destined for the mines or the saloons I could not say. Still, it was work, and work kept the silence away. In the evenings, I would return to my room and read by lamplight until exhaustion finally dragged me into sleep. This was my life in Ashfall. Quiet, gray, forgettable. Then, in the second week of October, a wagon arrived in town carrying goods for the general store. Among the barrels of flour and bolts of fabric and tools was a piece that drew immediate attention. It was a mirror, but not like the cheap tin-backed things that hung in most of the establishments. This was a proper-looking glass, nearly 6 feet tall, set in an ornate frame of dark wood, carved with strange symbols that might have been decorative or might have been something else. The glass itself was old, genuinely old, with a faint amber tint that spoke to its age. The store owner, a man named Dutch Kimball, was delighted. He had not ordered such an item, he said, but sometimes the suppliers in Denver sent unexpected goods on speculation. He placed it prominently in his store, thinking it might attract the wives of the mining supervisors, the few women in Ashfall who had pretensions of refinement. I first saw the mirror 3 days after its arrival. I had gone to Kimball's to purchase tobacco and some writing paper, and there it stood near the back of the store, catching the light from the windows in an odd way. Several people were gathered around it, looking at their reflections and laughing at how clear the image was compared to the warped mirrors they were accustomed to. Dutch's wife, Margaret, stood before it, adjusting her hair and smiling at her reflection. She was a handsome woman of perhaps 40, known for her kindness and her skill with herbal remedies. As I watched, her smile faded. She leaned closer to the glass, her hand rising to touch her face. Then she stepped back quickly, her face gone pale. "Margaret?" Dutch called from behind the counter. "You all right?" She did not answer immediately. She stared at the mirror for a long moment, then turned away without a word and walked quickly to the back room of the store. Dutch followed her, concerned, and the small crowd dispersed, their interest fading. I should have walked away then, should have purchased my items and returned to my room and forgotten the entire incident. But something about Margaret's reaction held me. I approached the mirror slowly, half expecting to see something immediately disturbing. But the reflection that looked back at me was my own. Same dark hair, same hollow eyes, same thin frame draped in a worn suit. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening. Yet as I stood there, I felt a coldness creep along my spine. The reflection was mine, yes, but there was something in the eyes. A distance, a knowledge. It looked at me the way a stranger might look at someone they pity. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the old glass slightly, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw my reflection's mouth move independently, forming words I could not hear. I jerked back. Dutch had returned to the counter, helping another customer, and when I looked at the mirror again, there was nothing but my own startled face looking back. I purchased my tobacco quickly and left. That night I could not sleep. I kept seeing Margaret's face, the way all color had drained from it, the way she had touched her cheek as though feeling for something that was not there. I tried to read but could not focus. Finally, near midnight, I dressed and walked through the cold streets to the saloon, thinking whiskey might quiet my mind. The Lucky Strike was the largest of Ashfall's 3 saloons, a 2-story building with a long bar and gaming tables and rooms upstairs where the sporting women conducted their business. It was crowded that night, full of miners who had just been paid, drinking away their wages in the few hours they had above ground. I took a place at the bar and ordered whiskey. The man next to me was someone I recognized vaguely from town, a supervisor at one of the larger mines, a man named Garrett Stone. He was already drunk, his eyes unfocused, and he was talking to anyone who would listen. "Saw myself dead," he kept saying. "Saw myself dead in that goddamn mirror. You hear me? Dead." The bartender, a thick-necked man named Frank, rolled his eyes. "You're drunk, Garrett. Go home. "I ain't drunk enough," Stone said. "Not near drunk enough to forget what I saw. My face, but not my face. Rotted. Maggots in the eye sockets. Teeth all brown and cracked. That's what I'll look like, Frank. That's what I'll be." "It's just a mirror," Frank said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Stone grabbed my arm suddenly, his grip strong despite his intoxication. "You seen it yet? You looked in that mirror?" I tried to pull away, but he held tight. "I saw it," I admitted. "I didn't see anything unusual." "Then you didn't look hard enough," Stone said. His breath smelled of whiskey and something sour beneath. "It shows you. Not who you are, who you'll be after. You understand? After you're dead. It shows you your corpse, your rot, your truth." He released me and turned back to his drink, downing it in one swallow. I should have dismissed him as drunk, as raving, but his words settled into my mind like seeds in dark soil. I finished my whiskey and left, walking back through streets now empty, except for the wind. Over the next few days, more people began talking about the mirror. Dutch Kimball's wife, Margaret, had taken to her bed, they said, refusing to speak, staring at the ceiling with wide, terrified eyes. When her sister came from Silverton to care for her, Margaret finally whispered what she had seen. Her own face, yes, but aged impossibly, skin like crumpled paper, eyes clouded with cataracts. But worse than the age was the expression, a look of such profound loneliness and abandonment that her sister wept to hear it described. Margaret had seen herself dying alone, forgotten, in some charity ward far from family or friends. She had seen the death of a pauper, the death of someone who had outlived everyone who might have mourned her. Garrett Stone had not shown up for work at the mine, and when they went to check on him, they found him in his room, sitting in a chair facing the wall, whispering prayers. What he had seen was himself hanged. He finally told the foreman who came to retrieve him. Not executed, but lynched, strung up from a tree with his hands still bound, his neck broken, his tongue protruding. He did not know why he would be hanged, what crime he would commit, but the vision had been so clear he could see the frayed rope, could see the way his body had turned slowly in the wind. The town doctor, a man named Albright who smelled perpetually of laudanum, was called to examine both of them. He could find nothing physically wrong. "Hysteria," he declared. "Sometimes happens in isolated communities, shared delusion. Best to ignore it, and it will pass." But it did not pass. More people began visiting the mirror at Kimball's store, drawn by curiosity or morbid fascination, and more people left with that same stricken look, that same pale horror. A miner named Chen, who had immigrated from Canton, saw himself in the mirror and immediately booked passage back to China, saying he would die among his ancestors, not in this cursed land. What he had seen, he told me before he left, was his body being prepared for burial according to Chinese custom, dressed in grave clothes, surrounded by incense and paper offerings. But his reflection's eyes were open and filled with a terror that suggested he would be buried alive, would wake in the darkness of the coffin and claw at the silk lining until his fingers bled, until his air ran out, until he suffocated in the dark. He would rather risk the long journey home, he said, than die that death in a foreign land. A young prostitute called Lily saw her reflection and quit her profession the same day, taking work instead at the laundry, scrubbing clothes until her hands bled as though trying to wash away what she had seen. She had been beautiful, with auburn hair and skin like cream, popular among the miners who could afford her rates. But in the mirror she had seen herself ravaged by disease, her face pocked with sores, her hair fallen out in patches, her body wasted to nothing. It was the death of syphilis, the death that came to many in her profession, and seeing it with such clarity made her unable to continue the work that would lead to it. A shopkeeper named Morrison saw himself dead by his own hand, a pistol still in his grip, brain matter splattered on the wall behind him. He sold his shop the next day and moved to Denver, thinking perhaps distance from Ashfall might change his fate. We heard later that he had stepped in front of a streetcar instead, choosing a different method but unable to escape the essential truth the mirror had shown him. A Mexican vaquero who sometimes worked the ranches outside town looked into the glass and saw himself trampled by horses, his chest caved in, his ribs protruding through torn flesh. He quit working with animals entirely, taking a job at the smelter instead, where the heat was unbearable and the fumes toxic. 6 months later, he died of lung failure from breathing the smelter smoke. Different method, same outcome: death by crushing, death by the failure of the chest to draw breath. An old prospector everyone called Wickenburg Pete saw himself frozen solid, preserved in ice, his eyes open and staring. He was found the following winter in his claim up in the high country, sitting upright against a tree, frozen exactly as the mirror had shown, as though he had sat down to rest and simply never gotten up again. The preacher, Reverend Thaddeus Cole, decided to intervene. He was a tall man with a booming voice, given to fire and brimstone sermons that most of the miners ignored. But this, he declared, this was clearly the work of Satan, and he would cast it out. He marched into Kimball's store on a Saturday afternoon with a crowd of curious onlookers following. I was among them, though I kept to the back. The Reverend stood before the mirror, holding his Bible high, and began to pray loudly, calling on God to banish this instrument of darkness. Then he made the mistake of looking into it. The change was instant. His voice cut off mid-prayer. The Bible slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a dull thump. He stared into the glass, and his face went through a series of expressions I had never seen on a human countenance before. Horror, yes, but also recognition, resignation, and finally, something that might have been rage, or might have been despair. He turned from the mirror slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "We are all damned," he said. "Every one of us, damned and rotting before we even die." He walked out of the store and went directly to the church. That night, he drank every drop of communion wine, and when they found him the next morning, he had hanged himself from the rafters, using the rope that rang the church bell. The town began to fracture. Some said the mirror should be destroyed immediately, thrown into the deepest mine shaft, or burned. Others argued it was just a piece of glass, and the Reverend had been unstable, and this was all coincidence and superstition. Dutch Kimball, caught in the middle, finally covered the mirror with a sheet and moved it to his storeroom, hoping to end the controversy. But word had spread beyond Ashfall. People from neighboring settlements began arriving, wanting to see the mirror that showed the dead. Some came out of curiosity, others out of a desperate need to know, to see what awaited them beyond the veil. The town's population swelled with these pilgrims of morbidity. They came from Silverton and Durango, from Ouray and Telluride, from settlements so small they had no names, just coordinates on a map. They came on horseback and on foot, in wagons and coaches, carrying whatever they had of value to trade for a glimpse. Dutch Kimball, seeing an opportunity even in horror, began charging for viewings. $1 to look, he said, and you could stay as long as you dared. Some looked and saw nothing unusual, just their own reflections, and they left disappointed or relieved, claiming the whole thing was a hoax. But others, oh, the others saw a rancher from Montrose saw himself gored by a bull, intestines spilling from a torn abdomen. A school marm from Silverton saw herself consumed by fire, skin blackening and peeling. A railroad engineer saw himself crushed between coupling cars, his body nearly severed at the waist. And all of them left changed. Some became reckless, figuring if their death was certain, they might as well enjoy what time remained. They drank more, gambled more, fought more. Others became paralyzed by fear, unable to leave their rooms, unable to eat or sleep, wasting away as they waited for the death they had seen to claim them. A strange economy developed in Ashfall. People would pay other people to look in the mirror for them, to describe what they saw, as though second-hand knowledge might be less damaging than direct observation. But those who took the money and looked often could not bring themselves to tell the truth. How do you tell a mother that her reflection showed her infant dead in its cradle, its tiny face blue and still? How do you tell a young bride that her reflection showed her old and abandoned, dying alone in poverty? The saloons did booming business. The Lucky Strike ran out of whiskey 3 times in 1 week. Men drank to forget, but the mirror's revelations could not be drowned. They persisted like poison in the blood, working their way deeper with each passing day. A traveling photographer who had come to document the boomtown captured an image outside Kimball's store. When he developed the plate, he found something impossible. The people in the photograph, a dozen or so waiting to enter the store, appeared normal enough. But in the store's window, in the reflection, they were all corpses. Skeletons in ragged clothes, skulls grinning, empty eye sockets staring out at the camera. The photographer destroyed the plate and left Ashfall the same day, swearing he would never return. A circuit judge who came through on his monthly rounds heard about the mirror, and being a rational man who believed in evidence and law, decided to prove it was all nonsense. He looked into the glass and saw himself hanging from a gallows, the black hood over his face, the rope tight around his neck. But what disturbed him most was not his own death, but what he saw in the background of the reflection, a crowd watching, cheering, celebrating his execution. The judge who had sent so many to the gallows would himself die by the rope, and the people would rejoice. He finished his court session in Ashfall quickly, rendering decisions that seemed almost random, as though the law had ceased to matter to him. Then he rode out of town and was found 3 days later in a ravine, his horse having thrown him. His neck was broken. The irony was not lost on anyone. And I, despite every instinct telling me to stay away, despite seeing what the mirror had done to others, felt drawn to it. In my room at night, I would think about it. What would I see? The question consumed me. I had spent 4 years trying not to think about death, trying to outrun the memories of young men bleeding into Virginia mud, trying to forget the way life left eyes, leaving them flat and glassy. But now, the question would not leave me alone. What would I look like, dead? I told myself I would not go. I told myself every day for a week, but the pull was too strong, like the call I imagine an opium addict feels for the pipe. Finally, on a cold November evening when the first snow had begun to fall, I walked to Kimball's store. It was after hours, but I knew Dutch lived above the shop. I knocked until he answered, looking haggard and afraid. His wife, I had heard, still had not recovered, barely eating, losing weight at an alarming rate. "I need to see it," I said. He knew what I meant. "I can't let you," he said. "I can't have another death on my conscience." "I'm already dead," I told him, and perhaps something in my voice convinced him of the truth of that statement, because he stepped aside and let me in. The store was dark, except for the lamp Dutch carried. He led me to the storeroom where the mirror stood covered in its sheet. and then he handed me the lamp and left, saying he could not watch anymore. I stood alone in that cold room, the lamp shaking slightly in my hand, casting moving shadows on the walls. The sheet over the mirror was dusty, as though it had been there far longer than a few weeks. I reached out and grasped the fabric. It was coarse beneath my fingers, rough like a burial shroud. I pulled it away. The sheet fell to the floor with a soft whisper, and for a moment I saw only the empty room reflected back at me. The shelves of dry goods, the barrels, the lamp in my hand creating a small circle of light in the darkness. Then I stepped closer, and my reflection came into view. For a moment I saw only myself, Samuel Mercer, 28 years old, thin from poor eating, exhausted from poor sleeping. The reflection looked back at me with hollow eyes, and I thought perhaps there was nothing more to see, that I would be spared whatever revelation had destroyed the others. Perhaps the mirror was simply a mirror after all, and the stories were just hysteria, as Dr. Albright had said. Then the reflection changed. It did not happen all at once. It was subtle, a gradual transformation that made it all the more horrifying because I could not pinpoint the exact moment when Samuel Mercer ended and the corpse began. My reflection's skin began to sink, to hollow, as though the flesh were being slowly consumed from within. The cheekbones became more prominent, sharp angles pressing against skin that was taking on a grayish tint, the color of old meat. The eyes receded into the skull, becoming dark pits, and I could see into those depths, could see the emptiness there, the absolute void where consciousness should have been. The lips pulled back, not in a grin, but in the natural contraction of desiccating flesh, revealing teeth, and the teeth themselves began to brown and crack, the gums receding to show the roots. Hair fell away in patches, littering the shoulders of the reflection with gray strands. The skin on the cheeks split, showing bone beneath, yellow and porous. But it was not just decay I was seeing. It was something worse, something that made the physical rot seem almost merciful by comparison. My reflection, my corpse, was in uniform, the same Union blue I had worn during the war, but now tattered, stained with old blood that had dried to brown, mud from Virginia fields, torn where bullets and bayonets had found their marks. The brass buttons were green with verdigris, the wool was moth-eaten and falling apart, and on the chest, where the heart would be, there was a hole. Not a bullet wound, something else, an absence, a darkness that seemed to extend beyond the fabric, beyond the flesh, into some place hollow and vast. It was as though something had reached into my chest and simply scooped out the center of me, leaving nothing but empty space. And in that space, I could see things moving, shadows that might have been memories or might have been something worse. The corpse's mouth moved, and though no sound came from it, I could hear the words in my mind, in my own voice, but twisted, distant, as though being spoken from the bottom of a well. You never came home. I understood then. I understood what the mirror showed. Not just the decay of the body, but the decay of the soul. What you would become after death was not simply a matter of flesh rotting in the earth. It was what remained when everything else was stripped away. It was your truth, your essence, your final form purified by mortality. And mine was a soldier who never stopped fighting, who never laid down arms, who never found peace. A ghost in Union blue, still standing on some metaphysical battlefield, heart hollow, home a place I could never return to, because the person who had left that home no longer existed. This was what death held for me. Not rest, not reunion with fallen comrades, not even the oblivion I had sometimes wished for. just the eternal continuation of being a dead thing that did not know it should lie down. The reflection's hand, my corpse's hand, reached toward the surface of the mirror from the other side, palm pressed against the glass. I could see the bones through the translucent flesh, could see the tendons like strings, could see where the skin had split and peeled back. Without thinking, I raised my own hand and pressed it against the mirror where the reflection's hand touched. The glass was cold, so cold it burned, and in that moment of contact, I felt something pass between us, some communication beyond words. The reflection was not showing me a possible future. It was showing me what already existed, what had always existed. I had died at Cold Harbor. I just had not stopped walking yet. The room seemed to tilt. I staggered back, my hand leaving a print on the mirror's surface, moisture from my palm forming a brief cloud on the glass. The reflection did not move with me. It stayed there, pressed against the barrier, watching me with those empty sockets, and I could swear I saw something in that hollow chest, something beating, a dark heart that pulsed with a rhythm that was not quite human. I turned and ran, through the storeroom, through the dark store, into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I gasped, breathing in great lungfuls as though I had been drowning. Snow was falling, large flakes that caught the light from the few windows still lit in town. I walked without direction, just moving, trying to put distance between myself and what I had seen. But you cannot outrun yourself. You cannot escape a truth that lives inside you. The days that followed exist in my memory as a gray blur. I continued teaching, continued going through the motions of life, but I was hollow. The children in my classroom were like phantoms to me. The food I ate had no taste. At night I would lie in my narrow bed and feel my heart beating. And each beat seemed like a lie, like a trick my body was playing on me, because I had seen the truth. I was already dead, had been dead since Cold Harbor, probably, or perhaps even before. The mirror had simply shown me what I refused to acknowledge. Others in town were experiencing similar awakenings. Mrs. Hatch, my landlady, confessed to me one morning that she had looked in the mirror and seen herself drowned, bloated, with her mouth full of water and riverweed. She had been terrified of water ever since, she said, would not even draw water from the well, made the other tenants do it. But she knew now, knew how she would die, knew it was coming for her, inevitable as winter. A young couple who had recently married looked together and saw their corpses side by side, but decades apart. The husband's reflection showed him old, peacefully dead in bed. The wife's showed her young still, her throat cut, her dress soaked in blood. They looked at each other differently after that, with suspicion, with fear, with the terrible knowledge that their love story would end in violence. The town doctor, all bright, finally succumbed to his own curiosity and looked. He saw himself in his current room, in his current chair, with a needle in his arm, overdosed on morphine. A week later, that is exactly how they found him. Whether he had seen a vision of the future or simply a suggestion he could not resist, no one could say. Dutch Kimball, in a moment of desperation, finally threw the mirror down one of the abandoned mine shafts, hoping to be rid of it. But the damage was done. The town was infected with knowledge, with certainty, with the terrible burden of knowing their deaths intimately. Some tried to change their fates. The young wife, whose throat was to be cut, left her husband and fled to Denver. He followed. No one knows what happened after that, but neither returned. Mrs. Hatch tried to stay away from water, but Ashfall was a mining town, and water was everywhere. She became more and more paranoid, more withdrawn, until finally she locked herself in her room and refused to come out. When they broke down the door 3 days later, they found her dead. but not from drowning. She had died of thirst, her lips cracked and bleeding, her body desiccated. The irony was not lost on anyone. I stopped teaching. The mining company sent letters demanding I return to my duties, but I ignored them. I spent my days in my room, looking at my own warped reflection in the cheap mirror on the wall, trying to see past the surface to the corpse beneath. It was always there now, in my peripheral vision. The soldier with the hollow chest, the dead thing that would not rest. Winter came hard that year. The snow piled high in the streets, and the temperature dropped until the very air seemed to crystallize. The mines continued operating, but with less vigor. Several had been abandoned entirely as miners fled, unable to cope with whatever they had seen in the mirror, or simply unable to continue working alongside men who now knew their deaths with certainty. The cold was brutal, even by Colorado standards. Temperatures fell to 30 below zero, and the wind that came down from the peaks carried ice crystals that stung like needles. Frostbite was common. A teamster lost 3 fingers when they froze solid while he was trying to fix a broken wagon wheel. A child wandered out during a storm and was found the next morning, frozen in a sitting position, looking peaceful, almost content, as though death by cold was preferable to whatever horrors awaited those who had looked in the mirror. The snow buried the ash that gave the town its name, creating a temporary illusion of purity, of cleanliness. But beneath the white blanket, the town was rotting. Supplies from Denver became unreliable as the passes closed. Food grew scarce. The miners who remained began hoarding what they had, and tensions rose. There were fights in the saloons, vicious brawls that sometimes ended in death. But even violence seemed different now, tinged with a kind of fatalism. Men fought not because they cared about the outcome, but because they needed to feel something, anything, other than the cold knowledge of their eventual decay. The school remained closed. The mining company's letters became more threatening, but I did not care. What could they do to me? I had seen my death. I knew it was waiting. Their threats meant nothing. On Christmas Eve, a strange thing happened. Someone set fire to Kimball's store. The blaze started in the back, in the storeroom where the mirror had been kept, and it spread quickly through the dry wooden structure. By the time people organized a bucket brigade, it was too late. The store burned to the ground, and Dutch and Margaret Kimball burned with it, apparently unable or unwilling to escape. Some said Dutch had set the fire himself, finally driven mad by what the mirror had done to his wife, to his business, to his town. Others claimed it was one of the people who had been damaged by their visions, someone seeking revenge against the man who had profited from their suffering. A few whispered that the mirror itself had caused the fire, that it wanted to be destroyed, or perhaps wanted to spread its curse through flame and ash. Whatever the cause, the fire lit up the night like a second sun, orange and red against the white snow, and the entire town came out to watch. They stood in silence, wrapped in whatever warm clothes they had, and watched Kimball's store burn. Some say they heard screaming from inside, but no one moved to help. No one tried to break down the doors or throw buckets of water on the flames. They just watched. In the ruins, they found the frame of the mirror, charred but intact. The glass itself had melted, forming a pool of amber-tinted slag that cooled into strange, twisted shapes. Some said they could see faces in that cooled glass. Others said it was just pareidolia, the human mind's tendency to find patterns where none exist. But I looked at that slag, at those frozen swirls of melted glass, and I thought I saw something. Movement, faces pressing against the surface from within, mouths open in silent screams, hands reaching. It might have been my imagination. It might have been the reflection of firelight. Or it might have been something else. something trapped in that glass, something that would remain there for eternity. But the mirror's absence did not heal the town. The knowledge remained. We all still knew what we had seen. We all still carried our deaths inside us like cancerous growths. I left Ashfall in February of 1885. I took what little I owned and rode south, not knowing where I was going, not particularly caring. I heard later that the town was abandoned by the following summer. The mines shut down. The buildings were left to the wind and the snow and the slow rot of time. Ashfall became a ghost town, haunted not by spirits, but by the memory of people who had seen too much. I drifted for years after that. I would find work in some town, teaching or clerking or doing manual labor, and I would stay until the dreams became too much. The dreams were always the same. I was standing before the mirror again, and my corpse reflection was stepping out of the glass, walking toward me with its arms outstretched, wanting to embrace me, wanting to pull me across that boundary between the living and the dead. I worked in a mill in Oregon, where the sound of the machinery drowned out my thoughts during the day, though nothing could silence the nightmares at night. I taught briefly at a school in Nevada, but the children sensed something wrong in me, something dead, and they became uneasy in my presence, so I left before they could ask me to go. I spent a summer working cattle on a ranch in New Mexico, thinking the open spaces and physical labor might cleanse me, but the horizon at sunset reminded me too much of the Virginia fields, of blood mixing with red dirt. Everywhere I went, I saw the mirror's influence, not the mirror itself, but its echo. I would see people in their final moments, or I thought I did. The bartender who coughed into his handkerchief and I saw blood there that no one else noticed, and 6 months later he was dead of consumption. The young mother I passed on a street corner, and for just a moment, her child's face looked blue and still. And that winter, the child died of diphtheria. The prospector who told me about a new strike, and I saw the cave-in before it happened, saw the rock crushing his spine, and 2 weeks later they were digging his body from a collapsed tunnel. Was I seeing the future, or had the mirror broken something in my perception, making me see death everywhere because I could not stop thinking about my own? I did not know. I only knew that the world had become a place of shadows and endings, where every face I looked at eventually showed me the skull beneath. I am an old man now, writing this in a boarding house in California, far from Colorado, far from Ashfall, far from the mountains that held that cursed mirror. My hands shake as I write, and my vision is failing. I have lived far longer than I ever expected to, longer than I ever wanted to. The war is 6 decades behind me. Everyone I knew then is dead, and yet I persist, this tattered flesh holding together through sheer stubbornness. And sometimes in mirrors, in windows, in any reflective surface, I catch a glimpse, just for a moment. The soldier in Union blue, the hollow chest, the eyes like dark pits, waiting, patient, because death is patient. It can wait forever. I do not know what that mirror truly was. I do not know if it was cursed by some witch, or if it was some strange natural phenomenon, some property of the glass or the metal backing that allowed it to show things beyond normal sight. I do not know if what we saw was truly our deaths, or simply one possible death among infinite variations. What I know is this: there are some things we are not meant to see, some knowledge that breaks something fundamental in the human spirit. We are built to live in the present, to hope for the future, to forget or deny the certainty of death. We need these delusions to function, to continue waking each morning, to find meaning in our brief days. The mirror stripped that away. It made death immediate and intimate and undeniable, and in doing so, It killed us all, even those of us who continued breathing. I often think about the others who looked into that glass. Margaret Kimball, who saw something so terrible she could not speak of it. Garrett Stone, who drank himself into oblivion trying to forget. Reverend Cole, who found his faith shattered by the revelation of his own rotting form. The young couple whose love was poisoned by prophecy. All of us, broken by knowledge, destroyed by certainty. There is a philosophical question I have pondered for years. If you know your death with absolute certainty, do you still have free will? Can you change it? Should you try? Or does the knowing itself create a self-fulfilling prophecy, a trap of inevitability? I do not have answers. I only have the memory of that corpse in the mirror, and the understanding that in some essential way, I am already that corpse, have always been that corpse. The flesh I wear is temporary, borrowed, a disguise that will eventually fall away to reveal the truth beneath. The sun is setting now, and in the window glass I can see my reflection overlaid on the dimming sky. For a moment, just a moment, I see both versions of myself simultaneously. The old man with white hair and liver-spotted hands, and beneath that, the soldier with the hollow chest, the empty eyes, the knowledge of endless war. I know how this ends. I have always known how this ends. The mirror showed me, and the mirror never lied. But what haunts me most, what keeps me writing these words in the hope that someone might read them and understand, is not the certainty of death. Death comes for everyone. What haunts me is the question of what we become after. Not the body's decay, which is natural and unavoidable, but the soul's transformation. The mirror showed me that I would remain a soldier, trapped in the conflict, unable to lay down arms, even in death. And I wonder, with a horror that has not diminished in all these decades, whether every person is similarly trapped, whether we all become simplified, reduced to our most essential nature, our core trauma, or joy, or sin, and remain that way forever. Are we all ghosts before we die? Are we all rehearsing for the roles we will play in eternity? I think of Mrs. Hatch, so consumed by the fear of drowning that she died of thirst. Did she become, in death, a creature of water and fear? I think of the Reverend, whose faith could not survive the sight of his own rot. What became of him? A thing of doubt and despair, wandering some metaphysical wilderness. And what of those who never looked in the mirror, who lived and died in ignorance of their final forms? Are they better off? Or is ignorance simply another kind of damnation, a blindness that leaves them unprepared for the transformation? These are the questions that circle my mind as I feel my own death approaching. It is close now. I can sense it the way animals sense coming storms. My heart beats irregularly, skipping and racing. My breath comes short. The doctors say it could be days or it could be months, but it will not be years. And I am afraid, not of the dying itself, but of what comes after, of becoming that hollow soldier, marching eternally through some gray landscape, fighting battles that were lost decades ago, unable to rest, unable to surrender, unable to go home. There was a woman in Pennsylvania before the war. Her name was Elizabeth, and she had hair the color of autumn leaves and a laugh that sounded like bells. We were engaged to be married. I wrote to her from the war, long letters full of lies about how it was not so bad, how I would return whole. But I never did return, not really. The man who came back was not the man she had agreed to marry. I released her from the engagement, told her to find someone worthy of her light. She married a banker and had 3 children, and lived, I heard, a happy life. I wonder what Elizabeth saw in mirrors. I wonder if she ever thought of me. I wonder if in her death she became something beautiful, something filled with the joy and love that defined her life. I hope so. God, I hope so. Because if death truly does reduce us to our essence, then perhaps it is possible to live in such a way that your essence is something worthy of eternity. Perhaps the mirror was not showing inevitable futures, but rather current souls, the truth of what we already were beneath the flesh. And if that is the case, then perhaps there is still hope. Perhaps even now, in these final days, I could become something other than a hollow soldier. Perhaps I could find peace, forgiveness, some spark of the man I was before the war consumed me. But I fear it is too late. I have carried this death inside me for too long. It has become who I am. The war never ended for me. I am still on that battlefield, still surrounded by the screaming and the blood, still unable to save the dying boys who called for their mothers in the Virginia mud. The mirror showed me the truth, and the truth was this. I died at Cold Harbor in 1864. Everything since has been a ghost's wandering, a slow walk toward the grave I should have occupied 20 years ago. There is a clock on the wall of my room, ticking steadily, each second a small death, a small movement toward the final silence. I listen to it and wonder how many ticks remain, how many heartbeats, how many breaths. The woman who runs this boarding house, a kindly widow named Mrs. Chen, has noticed my decline. She brings me soup that I cannot eat, tea that I cannot drink. She speaks to me in broken English about her own life, her own losses. Her husband died building the railroad, she says, crushed by falling rocks. She saw him in dreams after, she tells me, always working, always swinging the hammer, unable to stop, even in death. I nod. I understand. We are all trapped in our final moments, I think. We are all endlessly repeating our deaths, over and over, whether we see them in cursed mirrors or not. Night has fallen completely now. The lamp on my desk casts long shadows. In the window glass, my reflection is barely visible, just a pale blur against the darkness. But I know what is there. Beneath the surface, I know what is waiting, the soldier with the hollow chest, the dead thing that will not rest, me. I have written all this down, not because I think it will change anything, but because the story needs to be told. The mirror may be destroyed, melted down to slag in the ruins of a Colorado ghost town, but its truth remains. Somewhere, in attics and estate sales, in antique shops and private collections, there may be other such mirrors, other windows into the final self. And I want whoever reads this to understand. Some knowledge is not meant to be possessed. Some truths break rather than enlighten. Some revelations damn rather than save. If you ever encounter such a mirror, if you ever stand before a glass that promises to show you your death, your final form, your essential soul stripped of flesh and pretense, I beg you, turn away. Walk away. Do not look. Let death remain a mystery. Let it remain distant and abstract and deniable. Because once you see it, once you know it intimately, once you meet the corpse you will become, you are already gone, already dead, already lost. I speak from experience. I speak as a ghost who still breathes. I speak as a man who looked into the mirror and saw the truth. And the truth was this. I have been dead for 20 years and will be dead for eternity. And there is no rest coming, no peace, no home to return to. There is only the war, endless, infinite, eternal, and I am so very, very tired. The pen is falling from my hand now. My vision is blurring. The clock on the wall has stopped ticking, or perhaps my ears have stopped hearing. Either way, the silence is vast. In the window glass, the reflection is changing. The old man is fading. The soldier is emerging. I can see the Union blue clearly now, can see the hollow chest, can see the empty eyes. It is time. I am being called back to the battlefield. Cold Harbor awaits. And I, Samuel Mercer, teacher, veteran, ghost, am finally going home to the only home I have ever truly known. The place where I died, the place where I will remain forever and ever. Amen. Some frontiers were never meant to be crossed, and the boundary between the living and the dead is the most sacred of all. We crossed it in Ashfall in 1884 with that cursed mirror. We looked beyond the veil and saw ourselves as we would be, as we already were, as we would always be. And it destroyed us all. Remember that. Remember us. Remember that there are some things worse than not knowing. And the worst of all is to know your death so intimately that you cannot distinguish it from your life. Goodbye, and God have mercy on all those who looked into the mirror and saw the truth. God have mercy on us all.